At first, we told them this was going to happen. Then, we warned them this was going to happen. Then we showed them how it will happen. And now, they're in trouble because it did happen. In the Verden system, Verden 4 is the planet most desired by both sides of the current conflict. Though there are conflicts around the universe, this is the one we got pulled into. Both sides had taken ground right off the bat, and both sides had dedicated fleets to take the planet. However, neither side was willing to destroy the planet for victory, and once someone has a foothold on a planet, it's difficult to get them out. The worst part for all of them was the fact that electronic warfare had neutralized all of their so-called state-of-the-art weapons. Equipment wouldn't work, whether it was because they couldn't get electronic guidance, or some cases, most weapons just wouldn't work. But now what? Now how are they supposed to win? The reliance on technology meant that there was no chance of victory for either side, that is, unless they can force their way through. We've seen this before. It's almost nostalgic. Before we even arrived, these so-called technological species would look at us and give them their version of a backwatcher species, though I'm not going to repeat the words here as I hate the way they sound. Wow, it's even worse than what we used to call each other back in the day. As they think, we live in the middle of nowhere, cubed in the middle of space. Because when they found us, our technology was nowhere even close to theirs, at least not until our technology was released to the general public. Because of this, they started to call us those nasty names, which pretty much come down to a direct translation of the infirm. I hate the actual translation. As that was, they saw we could barely walk amongst the stars, so we were the infirm, an invalid, someone who couldn't move. Yet recently, we were finally able to reach out amongst the stars like all the other species could. Yet, even after that, they didn't seem to want us around, which was interesting. Especially since there are so many conflicts, you would think you wanted to bring as many bodies into the fray as possible. Yet they didn't think we could keep up. Surprisingly, it wasn't until they downloaded our history that is still dripping in blood, that they thought we might be useful. As they asked us for help, I was in charge of a few, and even the most basic trainees could see the path they were on, at least militarily. There was the common fray, the common balance, the kind of flux, or wavelength if you actually watch it. Between offense and defense, it would sway back and forth like a pendulum going from side to side. And now, defense is not just king, but defense seems to be emperor. It seems as though anybody who could get onto the planet and begin a defense line could immediately stop the opposing forces. This made the front turn into an actual meat grinder, as there was their version of no man's land in the center. Looking across the maps, you could see fortifications on key terrain, avenues of approach, and all this, since electronic warfare had introduced at such an extent, only what's considered by us to be dumbfire munitions are effective. Yet this is something the Allies complain about, as every piece of artillery and ammo is needed to try and get a hit. It got so bad that spy planes were being needed now. We were amazed at this, but it wasn't long until we realized that the satellite networks had been the first thing to get shredded. And ships can't cut through the jamming noise. First they got to get through the atmosphere and everything else, and now they got to get to the surface through all that garbage? Oh Lord. The problem is, they don't know how to rule the skies without computer guidance. They're so used to having aircraft that simply fly straight and true. They can't bank, they can't turn really. They just go in, launch guided missiles, or they just roll their own sort of tracked vehicles, hover vehicles, or whatever it might be, and simply launch a guided munition and call it good. Fire and forget. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. And without the guided munitions these fire and forget that they started to rely on with such an insane degree that there was no way to take the hardened positions that had unparalleled observation, excellent cover and concealment, obstacles strategically placed to slow down or stop an advance making the kill zone. They, of course, held all the key terrain on their own side of the line, and it was almost overly defended, and every single avenue of approach was monitored. The answer to this problem was simple, at least to humans. It's time to go medieval on their ass. Our non-human allies would ask us why we would always say it that way, and we simply responded with, as soon as we get started, they're going to be living the rest of their very short life in agonizing pain. Equipment and personnel were brought in masse. Seeing certain equipment had brought a smile to my face, looking over to see what was being rolled off. Seeing equipment we hadn't used in almost a century made me feel like a kid again. The first battle was designed to break the enemy's hold on the continent. We quit the subtle tactics, and it was aimed directly at the center of their line for good reason. For weeks leading up to this attack, at night strange black aircraft flew over the enemy at 3 times the speed of sound. The enemy tried to hit them. They tried anything to knock them down, but nothing moved fast enough or got high enough to actually strike them. They weren't expecting something like this. With each new aerial photograph that came in, or holographic display, which we preferred, the infantry and armor began to line up in positions. They didn't go unnoticed by the enemy forces. Even the blindest of enemy forces could see that an attack was coming, so they prepped themselves for a massive land invasion. What they received would change warfare galaxy-wide. For 3 full planetary rotations, the beginning of the fight started. It was a dance of artillery cannons that began to crank up and began to bombard using plunging fire across the entire enemy line. It was 17 kilometers deep as they hit. 17 kilometers from 1 kilometer in front of the line all the way back. Every enemy that was routed as the artillery kept coming closer and closer, and they kept running away from the explosions. The bombardment continued until the counter battery fire began in earnest. And with that, the paladins and any other platform simply packed up and moved before they were actually sighted in. Then they would set up in a new position, crank up again, receive the communications of where the fire was coming from, target these positions, and then start firing all at the same time. For 3 days, all they did was shoot, move, and communicate, as that is the name of the game here. Communications had to be done either with shortwave radios, which could only reach so far given the amount of electronic interference. However, hand signals and flares still worked. When the artillery stopped, the enemy sent out repair crews thinking it was over. This was the amount that we were going to throw at them. They had not seen a ground invasion yet, and they figured who in their right mind would advance without artillery cover and support? Then, as they thought they might be safe, something came in, and something made things so much worse for the front lines. Screaming through the skies, these strange beasts of machines came over, and the second wave began. The Xeno-friendlies thought they looked cute as they went across. Figured they would get shot down quick as they came in close to the enemy lines. We just told them, oh no, that's not going to happen. They were laughing in their own chittery way, or in some cases kind of a squawk, and then changed their tune as the birds began to sing. They didn't tweet, that's for damn sure. They all fired completely in unison, and our own Xeno allies were amazed as the 30mm cannon fired out so fast they couldn't hear individual shots. Then they saw armor-piercing incendiary rounds make clouds of dust out of everything they hit. They tore through the enemy with each burst. Flying in low, they didn't miss. They cut into the enemy positions, slicing into guns, targeting artillery still functional, and then dropping canisters of, well, what the Xenos would eventually call devil piss. Before the canisters even landed, the birds would bank away, leaving a telltale scream over the battlefield. This was enough to make all the feathers, scales, spikes, and anything of our Xeno compatriots stand up. But now we watched over, we wanted to watch them burn. This made the Xenos shake in fear as not only the scream, but then the explosion of sticky fire came out. Ground fire, of course, came up in mass, and one took a semi-direct hit. We watched as many of our Xenos started to worry that they were going to watch these devil birds fall out of the sky. Nope. They simply kept dropping more and more ordnance, whatever they had. In one case, it was hit almost directly, though part of the wing was gone and one of the engines went tumbling down on fire. The bird itself was in the air. All they did was drop their ordnance and bank towards home base. They needed repairs, after all. All you could hear was the fire. All you could hear was a "whoomp" that was coming out, the screams from the enemy lines, and then, of course, the burst of sticky fire that came out. The Xenos wondered why we called it jungle jelly. We simply had to tell them, you'll find out. As the old A-10 Warthogs, which were obviously upgraded for modern combat, drew all the fire, what the enemy didn't see was the new F-15's EX coming down. They each had bunker busters on them. We watched and I was amazed. I hadn't seen this used in a long, long time. And they simply dropped them straight down into hardened positions. Soon after they landed in, many of the Xenos thought, oh, that's not going to do anything. And then the internal explosions began to happen, leaving massive plumes of smoke coming up. Some of them even simply crumbled from the explosion. The hole also allowed for more access of sticky fire. Seeing all this happen, our Xeno allies started calling our aircraft Deathbirds. Though it was actually a translation. There was an actual word for it. I can't pronounce it. I only have one tongue and no mandibles to pronounce it right, of course. The reference was to one of the avian species on their own planets, which are extremely dangerous and beyond difficult to kill, at least used to without modern weapons. With this, the aircraft ran out of their ordnance and began to withdraw, and with that, the infantry and armor were ready to the advance, and they were not going to waste this opportunity. Though an advance needs cover, and they got it. The artillery began again. As the armor advanced, hidden fortifications were shown. The tanks did what they could, but all they had to do was fire, and these fortifications were seen. Once seen, we could use our only piece of electronic ordnance that we had, something that couldn't be stopped by their version of electric warfare. No, we had our own remote-piloted drones come in en masse, hundreds at a time, to take out the positions. Our pilots are good, really good, and they're good enough to fly into the windows and other portholes. This made the advance a lot faster, as many of the pillboxes simply exploded in a mass of dust and parts as they came out. Because of this, barely 7% of losses on the assaulting forces by the time they actually reached the line. Needless to say, that's pretty damn good. Getting past the first and second lines, we had another surprise. We called in the Angels of Death. This made many of our Xeno compatriots very, very nervous. They thought we already showed our angels of death, but no. We pointed to the sky, and they saw these very large aircraft that seemed to tilt just slightly as they crossed over from our right to our left. Then they saw why we called them angels of death, as a massive amount of fire erupted from the side. The fire was unbelievably accurate, firing not only seemingly a stream of tracer rounds down, but also seeming a 25 Mike and a massive artillery shell that came out. They were firing so much ordnance that even our own allies were wondering how in the hell did they carry that much. The remaining forces were trying to reconsolidate, but kind of hard to do that when you have over a dozen Death Angels on top saying, you're not going to do that. As we rushed through the lines, we had to clear out the buildings. This was a little easier because the smart munitions that the enemy usually had just doesn't work. We kept having to tell our Xeno buddies to hold on and stop because we have a different way of clearing out these buildings. They asked why, and we would hold up a strange device that was about the size or twice the size of our upper arm. And we would say always something crazy that they didn't understand. My preference was, fire is cool, fire is cool. And with that, I would simply poke it inside one of the holes, one of the doorways, and simply burn everyone down. The chants that were coming across about how we don't need no water and let something burn was constantly echoing through, and this was scaring the enemy so much that many of them simply surrendered as they realized that they could not hold the lines. As the final defense line is breaking, the sky tanks, as one of my compatriots would call it, came back. The A-10s were leaving massive areas burning as they were rearmed with a whole bunch more of jungle jelly. Others dropped their weapons at the sounds. Oh Lord, the sounds. They would hear the screech as it banked away, knowing that this aircraft, this thing that was up there that they couldn't seem to kill, was dropping more and more pyrotechnics down. They knew it was only a few seconds before it would explode, and they would hope that they were not in the blast range. Or they would hear the brrr. They would know that if they heard that, they were already dead. But if they were still breathing, they knew that they had been spotted already. Either one, well, it didn't mean they were going to be alive for very long unless they surrendered. With the defense lines broken, we had already succeeded in the first part of the divide and conquer, as we had drove right into the heart of their defenses, but they were not designed to protect from the sides, only from the front. This is why static defenses are the graveyards of armies. All your weapons are pointed one way. It didn't take much longer to rip their defense lines apart, and the battle for the continent was over in 2 months. The planet itself was secured in less than a year, and after the war the peace treaty was signed. An enemy ambassador asked us how we thought up such great weapons and how we were able to get them there, especially since designing something, then testing it, manufacturing and shipping, how did we do that so fast? On the holographic video, you could see the emissary smiling, simply saying, "We humans, we've known this is going to happen for a long time. When your fancy weapons fail and you can't use your guidance ordnance, we go old school tactics." And what is that? He simply reached out his hand and tapped the side of the A-10's nose. "Shoot them until they stop moving. Preferably with a really big fucking gun."